Okay, well, introducing them is going to be fairly simple because two of them we've already heard from during the event, and that includes Mahesh Patel, who, though I should point out, is one of P&G's leading entrepreneurs, but also has a lot of experience of doing business on a transnational basis in the region, so he's perfectly placed to sit on this panel. And someone else we've already heard from is Jonathan Kirkby, who is the he's the acting resident representative for the IFC, a division of the World Bank, in Papua New Guinea. And he has extensive experience of working in the investment area in the Pacific region. Finally, we have Ian Tarutia, who is the CEO of one of P&G's big two super funds, Nasfund. Thank you very much for joining us, Ian, today. He's a career officer with 28 years of superannuation experience. He became joint CEO of Nasfund in July 2007 and took over as sole CEO in 2011. In other capacities, he is the director, or has served as a director, on a number of listed and private company boards in sectors including agriculture, aviation, catering, finance, real estate, manufacturing, forestry, and finance. Did I have finance already? Savings and loan is the final one. So a very wide industry background there. What we'd like to do is, as I mentioned, is to get some insights based on their years of experience in the region. So I might just start with Mahesh, actually, and say, I'll put you on the spot there. You thought you were safe because you were sitting in the middle. But Mahesh, as many of you probably realise, Mahesh was originally from Fiji and started his business career there. But then he moved to P&G and from very humble beginnings founded the City Pharmacy Group, which today is P&G's leading retailer. So what I'd like to ask you, Mahesh, to start with is, what do you think are the fundamental differences between doing business in Fiji and doing business in P&G?
Well, let me go back, Robert. When I first came to Papua New Guinea 33 years ago, we only had 3 million people. Fiji had 800,000. Today, Fiji still has got 800,000. We got almost 8 million people. So there's a substantial difference. I think, and therein lies the opportunity. That the population growth is there, the number of people. Obviously, it's from a retail perspective, less matured market. And interestingly, I've mentioned in a number of conferences, I think 15 years or 12 years ago when I started writing to Australian companies, thinking they were our closest neighbours, I wrote 300 letters and I got 0 replies. So we thought, all right, well, obviously the Aussies don't understand Papua New Guinea, surprisingly. So in the last few years, I've approached companies in Fiji, which we've got a few joint ventures with at the airport duty-free and the Jack's apparel and all that. So I think there's a close alignment amongst the Melanesian culture, close adaptability, market type. So I think there is more and more opportunity to do these cross businesses between the Pacific nations of easy adaptability. We still like to see a lot of investments coming into the retail segment because there's only so much we as a group can do. We'd like to see development and the consumer needs being fulfilled, and Papua New Guinea is by no means been catered enough for the consumers of the want of services.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go over to Ian now. Nasfund, we mentioned when we were hearing from Derek from the Solomon Islands, he mentioned that one of the major investments from P&G into the Solomons recently was the splendid Heritage Park Hotel in Honiara. Nasfund, under Ian's stewardship, was one of the main partners in that project, and they've also made another significant investment in a fantastic hotel development in Fiji. Ian, it's a real pleasure to talk to you about those initiatives. They were really quite groundbreaking, I think, in the development and history of P&G investment. Can you just maybe talk us through how those investments came about?
Sure. Firstly, let me just point out that one of my directors are here in the room. So, as a board, they make those decisions. As CEO, we implement. So, Mr. Lamour is over there. Yeah. Well, as a superannuation fund, one of our mandates is to invest our contributors' savings. So, as part of our portfolio, looking at investing in the Pacific, was part of that diversification strategy, or part of that intent. The Heritage Hotel in Solomon Islands is one example of an investment that we've made with a fellow superannuation or provident fund. So our investment there, we've got about 60%. Solomon Islands NPF has 30%, and then our partner, Lamana Development, has 10%. The same also in Fiji. We partnered with the National Provident Fund of Fiji in the Grand Pacific Hotel. And that's that iconic structure that's in the middle of Suva. We've also financed the latest resort in Samoa, which is the Taumaeasina Island Resort. So the investments in the Pacific has been part of our portfolio. How does it happen? Obviously, relationships, and I think it was a common thread in discussions that we had yesterday and today. We have a very good working relationship with the fellow institutions over the colleague superannuation funds. And for us, apart from diversification, it gives us opportunity to exit if and when, and it gives the opportunity for our other co-investors over there to maybe take up, and so that's sort of the thinking that we had. And if I may just say that when we look at the Pacific, we shouldn't be looking at the Pacific as individual island states. We should be looking at the Pacific as a region, and I think that's what the board and certainly myself view Pacific. It's just an opportunity for investments, opportunity for cross, and there's a lot of good examples, not only us. We heard BSP, they got a footprint in the Pacific, Credit Corp's got a footprint in the Pacific. So there's, and obviously Mahesh and his associated companies. So there's good stories there, good cross investments, and as a region, certainly a good area for investment destinations. So.
Thank you. Jonathan, what I'd like to ask you is, based on your extensive knowledge of the Pacific region, where do you think maybe in the next decade the best opportunities are going to lie? What kind of trends are you seeing in terms of developments, different flows of direct foreign investment, different kinds of sectors that are taking off? What do you think, looking at it as an entire region, as Ian suggests, what sort of developments changes that we're going to see over the next decade?
Well, I mean, it's fairly clear at the moment, and looking at the Pacific, that there are some sectors that have great potential for investment at the moment. So tourism, obviously, across the Pacific is an area with a lot of potential. Fiji, Vanuatu, Tonga already have really important tourist industries that that provide a lot of economic income to their people. There is more potential in other parts of the Pacific. So, for instance, in say the western province of Solomon Islands, IFC certainly thinks that there's enormous potential for a big tourism development there. In fisheries across the region, again, there is potential. So PNG has been very successful in securing fisheries processing investment in recent years. Solomon Islands has its fish processors. Kiribati has, got small-scale fish loining plants, but there is a lot of fish in the Pacific, and there is potential, and probably potential to look at interesting ways how that kind of investment could be made. Making investments in some countries that draw on the fishing resources from other countries and so on. Agriculture is always going to be an important one. One of the big problems, obviously, in the Pacific, as we know, is access to land. It can be quite tricky. but there are some investors who've been very successful in unlocking that. So we heard earlier today about New Britain Palm Oil's operations in Solomon Islands, which have, expanding now in Guadalcanal, and of course New Britain Palm Oil has been very successful in PNG, so the largest single agricultural producer. So we see what Israel is doing in PNG now and unlocking new types of agricultural investment and in innovative ways that are really, I think, blazing the way and showing potential for other countries around the region. Connectivity is obviously a big problem for the Pacific, as we've heard as well. I mean, obviously, as the access to tourists and international air routes is important. So countries that have opened up their air routes and improved their infrastructure obviously have a lot more potential to attract tourists. It's a bit of a chicken and an egg question, like which do you have to do before you get the tourists? Do the tourists come and you improve your infrastructure, or you invest big and hope the tourists will come? It's probably a bit of having to do both, sort of hold hands and jump off into the unknown. But Samoa was very successful, for instance, in bringing in a new airline and investing in tourist infrastructure at the same time. There are big markets available potentially to the Pacific, apart from the traditional markets of Australia and New Zealand, such as the China market. So Vanuatu is making some progress in bringing in Chinese tourists. It's becoming an important market for Fiji. There are other opportunities for that, I think, in the Pacific. And then we see that there has been a lot of success across the Pacific in some of this retail type investment. So Fijian companies have been very successful moving into Papua New Guinea, the Vision Group now with JAX and CPL. There's even investment in Timor-Leste. I see Vinod Patel, hardware store operating in Timor-Leste. So again, exploiting those, I guess, the similarities and the understanding of how things work in the Pacific is important, and looking at the Pacific in that way. Telecommunications infrastructure will really open up things as well. So we heard again in Fiji that they have a growing and thriving business process outsourcing sector. Fiji has good telecommunications infrastructure and a lot of potential for that. But there is potential in other countries for that as well to develop. And opening up countries to the global markets through that type of telecommunications infrastructure is really important for many industries like tourism as well.
Thank you. Back to Mahesh. You've actually, as Jonathan's just alluded, in fact, you've taken advantage of your knowledge and contacts in both Fiji and PNG to form a lot of transnational partnerships. So making partnerships with companies from Fiji for business operations in PNG. What have you learnt from those experiences, and what kind of advice can you pass on about forming those strategic alliances or partnerships, from partners between more than one Pacific jurisdiction?
I think, as Ian touched on it, I think relationships are important. For people coming in, I think there has to be skin in the game. A lot of people have approached us over the years from various parts of the world, and you do this, we'll back you from where we are living, and you do the hard yakka on the ground. So I think one advice I give to most people is that there's no substitute to being on the ground, because you get the pulse of the market, you understand the culture of the nation, and you need to be out there knowing what the population wants. I mean, if you look at the statistics, 50% of our population is under 20. Therein lies the opportunity. The women folks that at CPL, we quite proudly are very focused on women's empowerment. And you can read statistics after statistics about how the economy can prosper just by empowering the female population. So I think if people were to come in there to understand the culture, be on the ground, after 33 years, I could comfortably go and live anywhere, but I'm still there, only because I feel it's important, and that's the only way you can understand the market and get the respect of the people, not only people working for you, but from the business community as well. That's really as simple as that.
Thank you. Ian, I wonder, I'm going to ask you the same kind of question. Based on your experience of investing in 3 separate and quite different Pacific jurisdictions from PNG. What have you learnt? I know those investments have gone very well, but if you were starting again, are there any things you might do differently?
Well, firstly, we enjoy a structured relationship with our fellow colleague funds in other Pacific islands. So that's sort of been the door opener in looking at the opportunities that we have, in Solomons and Fiji and in Samoa. I think the learnings from there is that if there's institutional support and if there's government support for investments, especially at a large scale, then things can happen. And I think Derek alluded to when he was wearing his investment promotion hat, to get the approvals and the statutory requirements so that it makes it attractive for looking at the investment, apart from the economic returns. I think that's been a learning for us. The support from a similar institution as well as government, and the same also happened in Fiji. So for us in that space, the learnings to make investments easier is the support from institutions and certainly from respective governments. Tax incentives, for example, import duty reliefs and so forth, so it makes the investment model attractive. So that's it. There's also another body which puts together all the funds in the Pacific. It's called the CEO Pacific Forum. So all funds in the Pacific that look after member contributions, they're part of that association. So conversations around investment opportunities, how we can help one another through cross investments, and that happens through that forum. So the next meeting will be held in Tuvalu in October this year. And, so that provides the opportunity for organisations like Nasfund, to have investment spreads across the Pacific.
And I'm sure you're not going to give anything away to us in terms of Nasfund's strategy, but from an individual point of view, are you what particular sectors or jurisdictions do you think might be interesting for PNG companies in the next few years?
Oh, I think a common conversation is the undersea cable, the submarine cable. I think we all need it. That's an important infrastructure. So it's not just the Pacific Islands. PNG needs it, and there's a lot of conversations going on at the moment. So that would be one in terms of key infrastructure. Back in PNG, there's opportunity in our agriculture sector. It's the biggest employer in PNG at the moment. So almost 50,000 people are employed in our agricultural sector, and a large bulk attached to our oil palm. So that would probably provide opportunity for other Pacific Island nations to look into PNG and into the agriculture sector, and then the enablers or the services that will go to support building our agriculture base. And then we obviously know of the development of tourism infrastructure in other Pacific Islands. I think we can do a lot more back in PNG. And in fact, there's a project that we're currently working on, which is just off Port Moresby. It's the Loata Island Resort. We're developing it with Lamana Development. So those so infrastructure in undersea cabling, and maybe some a good closer look at agricultural opportunities in the agriculture sector for me.
And continuing to keep an eye on tourism opportunities, by the sound of it.
So that's right, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you. Jonathan, you mentioned at least one investment already, but I'm just wondering if you could think of one or two other examples of investments you've seen recently or fairly recently in the Pacific that you really think kind of have worked particularly well, and sort of have a model that particularly highlights, how what's a good way of operating?
Well, I think if you look in the tourism sector, I guess some of those investments are really prominent. In IFC, we've looked for many years at the prospects for the tourist sector in the Pacific, and it's evident that other than Fiji, there aren't international operators in most of the countries in the Pacific. But what we've seen now is the experienced and successful tourism operators from the Pacific Islands expanding into other countries, and I think that has lots of prospects. So Lamana Group, has, in conjunction with Nasfund, has the Grand Pacific, the Heritage Park, the resort in Samoa. The Tanoa Group has bought into the Dateline Hotel in Tonga. So I think that's a really good way of expanding some of those tourism opportunities into sort of mid-sized hotels, opening up new markets that draws on the success of some of the tourism resorts already in the Pacific.
Okay, and without mentioning any names, when you've looked or possibly even been involved in investments that haven't gone so well, what sort of message would you give to the kind of pitfalls that can exist in the Pacific when you're investing just generally in the region or between one country and another?
Well, as I think we've talked about, having a really good local knowledge is important. So you need to come in and establish a presence. It's good, if possible, to work with a local partner so you get that kind of inside knowledge. It's very difficult, I think, to come in from the outside into the Pacific. It's in some ways a special kind of market. There's a lot of local knowledge needed. So knowing your market, knowing how to operate in the market, dealing with those sorts of land issues is very important. But I really think you need to spend some time getting to understand the Pacific and how it works.
Thank you very much. We asked Mahesh for the first word, so I think we might give him the final word. I wonder, looking ahead, what sort of opportunities you're excited about in the region for the next 5 to 10 years?
I think being a retailer, we're totally underserviced in Papua New Guinea. There's great opportunities there. I know there are barriers to entry because of the real estate pricing, but I think as development, it's a chicken and egg situation like the tourism. Do you build infrastructure to bring tourists in or what? So I think the mindset, and I think this is where the funds and major institutions can come along, that we've got a vast population, a young population, and they're hungry for services and goods. It's the willingness of parties to come and enter the market is the key. And keeping in mind that you can't just duplicate what's worked in one market to say, let's duplicate in Papua New Guinea. So understanding the local cultures, all the panelists have mentioned, is critical. So with my retailers, I think there's ample opportunity for a lot of categories in the FMCG consumer goods sector.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. That was a fascinating insight into a topic I think that has been very little explored in the Pacific. It's really only in the last decade that we've had a lot of these kind of transnational investments, and I think you've provided some fascinating insights. So thank you very much.